Hello there, and welcome back to the Apple Box Chronicles. My name is Peyton Buto,
And I'm Adrian Thomas.
and today on the ABCs, we are taking you from A to Z on a film that is near and dear to both of our hearts. So this is where the fun begins. We are talking about Star Wars Episode 3: Revenge of the Sith, of course. Happy Revenge of the Fifth to everybody. Adrian, how do you feel about Star Wars?
Yes, I love Star Wars. It's actually a pretty big part of my life. It really changed the course of how I viewed what I wanted to do in life. Actually, in fact, I remember when I first heard about Star Wars. I was living in San Diego, and I was like maybe 5 or 6 years old, and my dad comes home and he has this box set, which I didn't know what it was, but it had the figures on it. It was, I think, silvery, and it was a brand new box set for the special editions on DVD of the original trilogy.
I had
And
those DVDs too.
yeah, and I just remember when my dad brought it home, and I was like, this is, I don't know what this is, but this is kind of exciting. He seemed kind of excited to bring it home too. And yeah, that was one of my very first memories of like movie or movies being important. And I remember the prequels coming out. We didn't go see them in theaters, but I also remember right after we got that box set, we wanted to check out the other movies that were out, and we would rent Phantom Menace from the library. And then I remember Attack of the Clones came out, and we didn't see it in theaters, but I think they rented it from Blockbuster, and we saw it at home. And then Revenge came out, and I just remember when Revenge came out, it was everywhere. Like there was a McDonald's toy, and I remember getting, the Anakin Skywalker one, and then you open it up, or I think it was Darth Vader, and when you open it up, the character of Anakin was inside of it. It was like this kind of Russian doll kind of toy thing.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
I mean, I love Star Wars too. Always have. It's kind of one of those things that's just in my memory from the very beginning. I was 3 when Revenge of the Sith came out, so not really able to remember that
Yeah.
like you are. But I've always loved Star Wars. It kind of always felt like something. It's so iconic that it almost felt like something. It was like a no brainer. I was like, oh, you have to know Star Wars. You have to have watched Star Wars. But Revenge of the Sith, that was a very important blockbuster to me as a kid. I would watch that one all the time. I mean, I had the DVD, like I said, and I would get up on the back of a couch, kind of like this one that we're sitting on right now, and I would tell my sister I had the high ground. She was not interested in playing along with that, but it was yeah, it was a great time. I have a lot of fondness for Star Wars, and of course, this film in particular. In fact, after this most recent watch, I think this is my second favorite Star Wars movie. Most people who know me know that my favorite is The Last Jedi. That pisses some people off. I don't care. But this was always third for a while. But now I think it's number two. I genuinely, have come around to a point where a lot of people think that the prequels like they have all these issues and a lot of people will say, oh, they're guilty pleasures, they're nostalgic. I feel like there's kind of like a bell curve I went over where it was like, oh, these are supposed to be the bad ones, but then I kind of like them because they're nostalgic. Oh wait, no, these movies are good. Like there was a point where I was like, no, wait, these were never really that bad, were they? Or at least maybe they were just ahead of their time.
Yeah. There was a bit of a reevaluation of the prequel movies, definitely of recent, but when they were coming out and a few years afterward, it was kind of a big joke. They really thought George Lucas messed up Star Wars, but
It's a bit of a negative recency bias with Star Wars.
yeah, there was. I no, they just did not understand what he was trying to do with that trilogy, and some people still don't understand what he was trying to do with that trilogy. And I think with Revenge of the Sith, this being its 20th anniversary, and people going back to the theaters just to rewatch the re-release of it, it kind of shows that yeah, there's a big fan base for this trilogy, and people love these Star Wars. And I think for those who still hate it, we could, at least with this episode, we could kind of discover like why people disliked it at the time, but also why it's actually a lot greater than you probably thought it was.
Yeah, and there's certainly some new appreciation that I've gained for it. My last couple watches of it, we've actually seen this in theaters twice together.
Yeah,
Obviously, we just saw it because it just got re-released, but a year ago, almost like to the week or so, we saw it again in theaters. That was just something Alamo Drafthouse was doing around May 4th of last year. Um, but yeah, I mean, George Lucas, he had a vision for this trilogy that wasn't really understood, but here one of the things we like to do on the show is really look at everything in context and look at the
yeah,
history and look at everything that's come before this. And even with a big property like Star Wars, this was a time when Star Wars was almost like, well, not almost, it kind of was an auteur work for George Lucas. This
yeah,
was not bought by Disney yet. This is something that he had a vision for and that he was seeing that vision through. And so naturally, we need to look back to
yeah.
understand why it's so great and why he did it the way he did it. So, you want to talk a little bit about his early work, like THX 1138, American Graffiti? Those are the films that have come before Star Wars in
Yeah,
his career.
yeah. I from all the stuff that I've learned from him, I've been a big fan of George Lucas for a very long time, and I did a lot of research of him recently and like back in the day. But he was so ahead of its time. It's kind of insane. So let's do a little backstory on like who George Lucas was. And he was a kid who grew up in California, and he was really into cars. Like he really loved driving cars and like being like a mechanic and all that jazz. And he really thought that that was going to be his future, was going to be in driving and creating cars, until he had a pretty bad accident when he was a teen. And it when he woke up from the incident, the nurses were like, "Don't worry, you still have your arms and your legs. You're good." So it could have been like it could have been a fatal crash. It almost looked like it was going to be a fatal crash, but he miraculously like didn't die from it. So after that life changing experience, he knew he had to kind of change directions of what his career was going to be, and he kind of found that through movies when he went to University of Southern California. And
Same school as Ryan Johnson, who went on to direct a Star Wars movie himself.
yeah, there was a bunch of kids that went to film school there that kind of made that school prestigious because of all the alumni that used to um, go to school there, like George Lucas and like Robert Zemeckis, all these guys that went to school there. Anyway, well, he did a short film at that school called THX, and that won a few awards, and it was really groundbreaking at the time. They didn't know that you could do that kind of filmmaking um, in a short and really like blow people's minds. For instance, when Spielberg saw the short, he was the Steven Spielberg. When he saw the short, he was like, I can never make a movie that good." And so it just kind of shows how much, um, how ahead of his time he was, even like way back in his college years. And then after college, he got into kind of like this fellowship with Francis Ford Coppola, who's known for doing The Godfather and Apocalypse Now. And he was like an assistant on one of Coppola's films. And while he was an assistant there, they kind of figured out that they need to get out of the studio system, because they felt like the studios were not allowing the directors to showcase the vision. They were too focused on money and not the creative side of filmmaking, and it wasn't giving them opportunities to make the films that they wanted to do, anything like avant-garde or experimental. So they created the very well-known company now known as American Zoetrope, which is was founded by them, but it's mostly owned and operated through Francis Ford Coppola. And their very first film was THX 1138, which was the full length version, a remake of his short film that he did in college. It was extremely experimental. It was about it was basically about how they wanted to break out of the studio system because it was so oppressive and they had no creative control. And it was a big metaphor for that, and not just breaking out of the studio system, but like breaking out of like how society has oppressed them through the Vietnam War and going through capitalism and Reaganomics, all this stuff just stuffed into one movie, and it's almost when you first watch it, it's almost hard to comprehend what's even happening because there's so many different themes going on. And that was a big failure. It was received well, but like nobody saw it. They didn't know how to market that thing. And after that, Lucas was kind of in a stump. He didn't know really what to do. He wanted to do Star Wars after that, but Coppola was like, "No. If you can get that off the ground, there's no way you're going to get this weird sci-fi fantasy kids movie off the ground. Nobody's going to do that. I want you to prove to me that you could do something different and give me a comedy. Direct a comedy, and if that's a success, we can see what can happen later on." And he did that with American Graffiti.
Which American Graffiti, we just watched that.
We
an hour ago.
Yeah, we wanted to watch all of his films before doing this so that we could kind of go through uh, his background and really pick up all of his influences for Star Wars. But yeah, he was able to do American Graffiti, and he changed the game with that movie. It was a huge indie success because they shot it on a very low budget, but they made, I believe, like 100 million back, which is a really big success for a movie back in those days. And again, nobody had any faith in that movie. They were like, this is just a bunch of kids riding in cars with some music being played. Nobody's gonna watch this. But a lot of people did. It was very relatable. We hadn't seen kind of like this hangout, coming of age cruiser kind of film before.
And we've seen a lot of those since.
We've seen a lot of those since. We wouldn't have Dazed and Confused without that. Shoot, we wouldn't have like Superbad and all these.
Very much some similarities to Superbad.
There's a lot of influence from this movie that I still think people don't talk about enough.
Yeah, I mean it's directed by the guy who made Star Wars, and yeah,
and yet, yeah,
it just goes over people's heads.
Yeah, and I think it's still brilliant. Like it, for instance, the soundtracks in the movie, they didn't do that in movies a lot back in the day. They didn't have an entire movie scored by soundtracks from like
using a bunch
period.
of licensed music.
Yeah, and he was like, "No, this is gonna be the sound design of the movie, much like just really good sound design would be. It's going to be in the background, but it's also going to tell the story as well through the genre of music or the theme of the song."
It's a lot about setting too.
Yeah, and he would work with a lot of the people that he would work on Star Wars with on that movie as well, and we'll talk about a lot of the similarities that come from that movie as well. But I just wanted just to showcase he just broke through doing kind of the impossible twice. Of course, the first one wasn't a huge success, but the second one really was. And even though he's still working in this studio system just to get American Graffiti out, he knew he had the confidence that like, if I could do this, if I could figure out to do this my own way, I could really like change the way that I want to make films and how film can be different and made more efficiently and not as rugged and textural as it was back in the 70s.
And I mean, some people prefer that.
Yeah, some people still prefer that, but I think this is kind of the germ, especially when he started making the very first Star Wars, New Hope, about what he wanted to see with the future of filmmaking. especially since at that time they didn't have the resources to do what Star Wars did.
Reminds me a little bit of a character from Francis Ford Coppola's Megalopolis that just released last year.
Yeah,
He reminds me a bit of that main character because he's just like, no, I see this vision for the future, but nobody gets it, and I can't really like, how do I get this out of my mind and into something tangible and real?
yeah,
You know, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if, I mean, you know what, I think it's safe to say that Francis Ford Coppola is heavily inspired by George Lucas when he made that film in particular,
yeah. I
but
think
also so many others.
yeah, Megalopolis has that George Lucas prequels feeling
I
to it.
bet George Lucas loves that movie.
Oh, probably yeah, with the the usual Coppola flares to it, but yeah, I think down the line people will look back at Megalopolis, and I don't think it will still be received uh the same way that it is now, but I think people will look back and be like, that was different. That was weird.
and
That
and that's kind of exciting.
yeah.
So, Revenge of the Sith, being George Lucas's latest film, it's 20 years old, but it's his latest film.
Yeah.
Um, this is probably, I mean, his biggest achievement. It's the one that I think he made that's closest to this kind of digital utopia that he was trying to tap into with
Yeah.
the prequels. And what I love about this movie in particular is that it feels like with each movie, it just becomes more and more refined in every aspect to
Absolutely. Yeah.
become what he wanted it to be. And I'm sure looking back, I don't know George Lucas, obviously, but I'm sure looking back, he might wanted to have changed some things, do some things differently that he just couldn't. But I mean, that's just life.
No, yeah, that's a big thing. So when they were doing Star Wars, A New Hope, the very first one, I think he was quoted saying that only 20%, 25% of what he actually wanted on screen actually was on screen, and so he was never really proud of that first movie because he was like, yeah, we got it made through duct tape and plaster and all. Like it was really a very maverick way of making movies, really guerrilla way of making movies. And he was like, "There's, it's not producing the thing that I see in my head. I'm not.
Right.
It's not giving me the movie that I see in my head that I really want." And that's kind of why every movie since Star Wars, the first Star Wars, has been just him trying to perfect the way of filmmaking for himself so that what he could see is possible.
And, sorry. Um, yeah. I mean, this is kind of almost funny in a meta way because in the original Star Wars you have the rebels who are very much kind of I don't know how to describe it, but they're very much like getting by on what they have, you
Yeah.
know. Not a lot of resources fighting this giant oppressive like empire. But then in the prequels, it's sort of, you know, you're going into the past, you're going into this high society where people understand what Jedi are, and it's all very kind of organized and glossy in a way.
Hmm.
And what's funny is that even though he felt he couldn't make the movie he wanted to make back in 77 with the original Star Wars, in a way he made a movie that complemented the era of Star Wars that he was operating in story wise,
Yeah.
and that complemented the characters of that film and of that trilogy. Whereas now with the prequels, it just so perfectly fits that that's the movie set that he made when he could kind of do more things that he wanted to do, and the result looks more like how that era of Star Wars feels. And I mean, it is symbiotic, where the look of the movie obviously informs how the movie feels, but it's just kind of got this perfect tone to it, this kind of odd, like theatrical, kind of almost Shakespearean tone to it, with all the way that all the characters speak and the way that everything is constructed, and just the massive use of digital effects. And what I really love about this movie and just all three of these. I mean, I think I've come around on really thinking that these are like beautiful looking movies, especially Revenge of the Sith. Because Revenge of the Sith has constant movement. This is something that George Lucas took from Kurosawa, who's my favorite director and who's one of his favorite directors. It's just this depth of image, this constant movement in the background in almost every shot of Revenge of the Sith. There is something in the background moving. There is some kind of battle going on in space, or these kind of space car ships are flying around Coruscant, and there's almost always a window to see all of that while the characters are talking or whatever's going on. There's just always so much life to everything. And it reminds me a lot of what Kurosawa did, the kind of sense of wonder I get watching his films where I'm like, oh man, there's so many like hills back there and moving, like look at all those horses and all those guys in the distance, and it's just that but in a digital context. And that's what I just really scratches my brain about this movie is I love how it looks and how he did the digital environments.
Yeah. So about the movement, he was saying when I saw this documentary called Light and Magic, where it's about the creation of Industrial Light and Magic, his company for visual effects. He was saying that film was made for movement. It's called a movie. It moves. Like that's the one thing that differs from music or like reading a book. It's like movies move. You see the picture. You see things moving on screen. Like that's kind of the whole thing about movies. It's moving. So he loves seeing really fast things on screen. And you could see that throughout his career. For instance, THX, there's that chase at the very end where they have these really fast cars going like 200 miles per hour. And it's really beautiful, just race car shots of them driving really fast and motorcycles driving really fast. He loves that kind of stuff that you would see in like Phantom Menace with the whole pod racing
Yeah, the
scene.
pod racing.
And then you also see that, of course, in American Graffiti with the race at the end, where and that movie's all about cars. That movie, he just if he loves cars and fast things. So in the Star Wars movies, since there's no cars, you got to get all those speeders and all the big ships to look really cool and seem like they're going really fast. And that was the problem with kind of movies and special effects before A New Hope, was that you could either have really good effects but it's going really slow, or you could have really bad effects and it's going really fast. He was like, there needs to be a middle ground. We have to get really good effects that go really fast because that's the point of making movies. Because we got to see things going really fast.
And that is almost like a childlike wonder and reverence that he has for fast things, but it's really cool.
Yes, but I think something people don't really pick up as much is when he's not going fast. I think that's when it gets really interesting. That's almost all the scenes where there's very minimal movement is when in Revenge of the Sith is when it's Anakin and Padme talking. And that's when he goes into THX mode whenever we see the characters like getting really close and intimate, just big faces on the screen kind of lining up with each other and coming together. And I think that's kind of almost like a stylistic uh, metaphor for the character in the movie. Like everything around him is like it's calling for him to do something more, something big, for him to get faster, for him to become a master faster.
Yeah.
But Padme is the only one that could slow him down and really make him think and be patient. And when that becomes an issue for him, when he thinks that he could see the future and see Padme dies, his life crumbles. It can't be slow anymore. It has to be fast. He has to save her. He can't be patient anymore. And I think that's a huge thing in the movie that I don't think a lot of people are probably going to pick up on.
Yeah, I mean, when we were on our way home from the theater from seeing this, you even pointed out a detail to me of how there's a shot of him and Obi-Wan going up some stairs, and Obi-Wan is taking each step while Anakin is skipping steps.
Yeah.
It's just these small kind of details put in to support that character arc.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right on the money with that.
Yeah, I think that's just why I think Revenge of the Sith is no. You said it's your second favorite Star Wars movie.
Yeah.
It might be my first favorite. It might be my favorite one. Then that's kind of crazy because A New Hope has always kind of been my favorite one. I know it's the first movie. It's kind of
It's
the
a classic though.
it's a classic. It's
It's
the
a
one that
brilliant
everybody
movie.
loves, but it is flawed. And I think
It is
Revenge
flawed.
of the Sith, as flawed as people may make it out to be, I think it is his magnum opus. It is the movie that he wanted to make all the way back near damn near the very beginning. It's the movie that he wanted to tell and showcase through all of his knowledge of, the hero's journey and what he wants to see on screen. The culmination of everything that has ever influenced him is in that singular movie. And whether you like it or not, that is the perfect movie that Lucas has always wanted to make, I think. And I think he pulls it off. Like, even with all the spectacle and the digital like utopia of it all, it's still a very like it's a very heartbreaking movie.
It
Like,
is. It's a very human film.
it's so emotional. Like every time on the lava bed, that scene, like it like nearly breaks me. It's so sad because I could just imagine, like, I can't imagine what it's like to take down your your pupil and who's like a brother to you, and it's like you've taught him everything you know and you wanted greatness for him.
And he had
And
to use that against him too.
yeah, and when he says uh I loved you, you're a brother, like it really hurt. It's like, wow,
It
that
really,
sucks.
yeah,
It's
it really hurts. And that's why I think a lot of people say, oh, I watch it and every time I hope that it won't go the way that it did before, but it always does. So yeah, it is a heartbreaking film. And talking about that scene in particular, well, that whole set piece is incredible. It's been talked about for years. Still great on the big screen,
yeah,
especially in 40x. We saw it in 40x,
we got to talk about the
and
40x
that
experience.
was amazing. But just real quick, the scene in which you're talking about, there's a thing with the dialogue in this movie where I feel, like I said, it is the most refined. Like it's kind of hit that point where you're like, oh no, it's not. And this is an assumption a lot of people make about so many films. Is like, oh, it's not just that George Lucas doesn't know how to write dialogue. It's that, and I mean, people who have worked with George Lucas have said that George Lucas writes kind of goofy
Hey,
dialogue.
even George Lucas has admitted, he's like, I'm like the king of wooden dialogue. It's fine. He
Yeah,
doesn't really
but
care.
I think it honestly is able to cover that up because the way that this movie so honestly buys into all the melodrama, all the grand tragedy of it all. I mean, that's one of my favorite scenes in the movie. Like, I have the high ground. It's become like a meme. It's become a joke. But he is genuinely taunting Anakin, saying, I am better than you. I have the high ground. You're not going to win. Because he's trying to get him to do the exact same move that he did on Darth Maul. He knows what Anakin's going to do, so he can predict it and take him down. Similarly, the dialogue scene between the two of them before the fight starts, yeah, that's my favorite scene in the movie.
Yeah,
I cried watching that because it's, first of all, it's heartbreaking to see like him use the force choke for the first time
yeah,
on Padme, but then also that back and forth, it's again been kind of turned into a meme. People quote it all the time, but it really, when you're fully immersed in this movie, it really is emotional and it feels like so theatrical in a good way. And so I just love that build up. It gets me so excited and devastated at the same time.
yeah. And about the acting, it's very operatic and theatrical, which a lot of the actors, like Palpatine, he was known for being a, like a theater actor, and he was big expressions and uh, like that kind of grand, exaggerated act type of acting that you don't like to see on screen because movies can be more intimate and you don't need that exaggeration. But for something as operatic as Star Wars, that's kind of what you want. That's what you're leaning into. Where the original trilogy, more indie, smaller, the acting is a bit more like an adventure kids uh, movie.
A
And
little more Saturday morning cartoon.
yeah,
Yeah.
but this one, even though it's still for kids, it it takes on this aura about it that it's like this is a bit bigger. This is the crux of what Star Wars is about, and it has to be more um, classy in its operatic depiction of this story, and it's very Shakespearean, as you said, and that's I think that's something that's really cool. That's what's going for it, and a lot of people will see that as a negative. It's like, oh, that's not how people act. It's hammy. It's too wooden. But I think it's a nice little middle ground for that movie at least.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, I completely agree. Let's talk just a little bit about the 4DX that we experienced watching this movie in, because it was really great. You and me both agree that one of the best things about it was the Force lightning,
Yeah,
like the way that the seat would rumble, the way that the lights on the side of the theater would flash. It really did feel like you were getting electrocuted.
yeah,
I
and
mean, obviously not literally, but
yeah, and for those who aren't aware of what 40X is, it's basically like your seats move. They'll spray a little bit of misty water on you. They'll shoot little air
yeah, they have like
at
a little smoke machine at the front of the theater
yeah.
too.
They'll have lights on the side that goes off whenever something crazy happens
Yeah,
on
it's
screen.
basically just to give you like let's say almost like a little roller
It's
coaster
like a little roller
where you're kind
coaster.
of moving with the movie. It's and George Lucas, he would love that movement.
But yeah,
Um,
the 40X is really good. At least based on what I've heard from other 40X experiences, this is like probably one of the better ones because like we've said, there's a lot of movement in this movie, and so whenever something's moving, your chair is moving, like something's happening.
yeah, it was really great, and unfortunately, you can also watch this movie in 4D by walking outside because it's a very relevant movie politically speaking.
Yeah.
I think as well. Unfortunately, we don't really need to get into the nitty gritty. You know, if you're a person existing right now, you kind of know what's up.
Yeah.
But it's let's just say it's a bit scarier
Yeah.
watching it 20 years later.
The prequels have really it's so crazy how accurate the prequels are about politics in the real world. Like the very beginning of Phantom Menace in the crawl, it talks about tariffs and there's a trade war brewing, and I mean that's what's happening right now in 2025. Like we're going down that road, and this movie was supposed to be cautionary, but nobody's listening to it because they're like, ah, these prequels aren't very good. They're making it too political.
So
They're supposed to be for kids.
yeah, yeah. That I mean, he kind of really made the least diluted version of what he was kind of saying in the original trilogy. It's just
Yeah.
like way more overt in
Yeah.
these movies, and uh, it's almost like they had to just drop it on us again. They were like, okay, clearly you guys didn't understand the first time. Let's re-release the
Yeah.
movie. It just feels a little bit poetic to have re-released this right now in a bad way. Um, but this is this trilogy. It really is like the third time that George Lucas has revolutionized filmmaking in a way, or
Absolutely.
yeah, put something out there that completely changed the game. So uh, I'll let you take this because you're the history
Yeah.
guy. But
So
there's three when we were thinking about this.
yeah, we were so in my opinion, and in a lot of people's opinion, I think George Lucas is actually kind of a genius. Like I think he was so much of a forward thinker and a dreamer and a believer of things being possible. It's like nothing is impossible to this man. If we are able to do it, if we just put enough like minds together and enough creativity put
And
into
we
it.
we need artists like that. We need
Yeah,
as many artists like that as we can get.
and he did not take. It's not like he didn't take no for an answer. It's more like what I would hear a lot of him saying from other like anecdotal things is that he would say just think about it. he would give them like this prompt about like, oh, I want this to happen in the shot, and everybody would be like, that's impossible. We've never done a shot like that. You can't do it. And he'd be like, oh, okay, well, just think about it. And then literally like minutes afterward, they would figure out some way to do it because all they had to do for just a minute or two afterward is just think about it. How can we actually do this? And they did that a lot throughout all the Star Wars movies that he's been a part of. And he did that three times with, for instance, like our first time we see that he knows what he's doing and he's kind of a breakthrough director with American Graffiti. He did what people thought was going to be just a stupid coming of age kids movie that nobody would like, and it turned out to be like one of the biggest hits of that time. He was a huge director from that movie, and he was paid a lot for that movie. And since he knew he didn't want to deal with the same corporate BS that he had for American Graffiti, he used his money from American Graffiti to pretty much help fund the Star Wars movie. And since he didn't have, since it was he was using his own money, he had to be very resourceful and very efficient with the way that he made that movie. And so he would hire people that he trusted and knew were very creative and very intellectual to help make Star Wars what Star Wars is. And then they did do Star Wars. And when Star Wars came out, it blew people away. Like, it's, I'm actually so jealous of the people that saw Star Wars for the first time because all I ever hear is how much that movie changed the way people saw movies. Like, he did something that people just had never seen before. And I think the only thing I could probably equate that to is when I first saw Avatar for the first time in 3D, and that just kind of broke everybody
That
as
that
well.
one is really mind blowing, especially in 3D.
Yeah, but with the original Star Wars, that changed the way that everybody saw movies, including the studios, and that's how we got that big push forward for studios to really put a lot of their money into big name directors that they really trust, and we would see the beginnings of filmmakers like Steven Spielberg and James Cameron and Ridley Scott and all those guys because studios figured out once again it's like, oh, if we give a little bit of money to the creatives and let them do what they want to do, then we might actually get a good movie out of this. And I think that's one way that Star Wars really kind of broke the mold.
But then it does it again when he releases the Phantom Menace.
Phantom Menace is even more interesting because this isn't necessarily breaking ground in terms of, uh, I guess, the spectacle, but I think it's breaking ground in terms of how you get to that spectacle because before Phantom Menace, one of the biggest uh, projects involving CGI was Jurassic Park, and once they figured out that they could do that, they can make these creatures look real and breathable. That's when George Lucas was able to say, we can make Star Wars now again because we could have characters that are fully CGI that could work, and we could use digital filmmaking. And with Phantom Menace, he really pushed for digital filmmaking. I think without George Lucas in that instance, we would not be seeing a lot of digital filmmakers today. Like, I think it was in 2002, like around Attack of the Clones, he had a summit at Skywalker Ranch with a bunch of filmmakers like Michael Mann, Spielberg, all these guys that were big at the time, and he basically sold the idea that digital filmmaking is going to be the future, and you guys should hop on as fast as you can because not only will it be easier for you, but it will change the way that filmmaking is going to be done for the rest of history. And you would see like a Michael Mann movie like Collateral. That thing's all digital. It has a completely Miami Vice. Look at that movie. It's not shot on film. Like, I forgot what other directors were in that, but I think maybe Oliver Stone was in there. There was a bunch of filmmakers that would eventually turn to using digital filmmaking as a way to shoot their movies, and that really blew up and changed the way that directors direct now. And he just did that throughout his entire career, was pushing the medium forward. For instance, if you're editing a video right now on your computer, all that you could do on your computer was based on George Lucas's Edit Droid, which was one of the very first, if not the very first, digital video editor. And
It's the reason we have the podcast.
like we were literally editing videos earlier today, and it's like that's because of George Lucas. And for instance, Photoshop would not happen without ILM, which was created by John Knoll and his brother and a few other guys. And it was because John Knoll was on ILM and was able to see what they were doing with Pixar, another thing that George Lucas damn near created and then sold to Steve Jobs to become Pixar. They first utilized
Steve Jobs?
Steve Jobs.
I didn't know that.
Steve Jobs. So when they had Pixar, it was this big computer that you were able to, create images, and like you can move it around, in the beginning of CGI. But it wasn't something that someone off the street could just buy. It was very much something a company would have to buy or utilize. And so with John Knoll, he was like, we could utilize the technology of Pixar and help people who just want to create images or like do any Photoshop, which is what he created. Well, he gave people the opportunity to create images that they wanted to on the computer. And through all this technology that George Lucas is inventing and helped inventing, we are just creating more and more technology that could help the consumer out. And it just goes on and on and on.
It goes beyond movies.
It goes beyond movies. It's kind of crazy how much of an effect George Lucas had on the entire industry. Like the fact that we have digital projectors is because of Phantom Menace, because they shot most of it in digital, and they were like, when we do Attack of the Clones, it's going to be all digital, and we're going to need digital projectors. And at that time, there was only maybe like 100 digital projectors.
Yeah.
By the time Attack of the Clones came out, a few thousand digital projectors and more. So he was changing the game, and nobody was talking about how he was changing the game. All they wanted to talk about was how bad they thought the prequels were.
Or how they didn't like the acting or the dialogue.
Yeah.
And very briefly, I just want to talk about, we talked about a lot of the things George Lucas influenced.
Yeah.
I want to talk about some of the things that influenced him, because this is always a fun topic for me, because I get to talk about Akira Kurosawa, who I love so much. He's my favorite director. And as you can see, if you're watching this visually, there is a picture on screen to demonstrate, but there is a huge influence between the samurai in Kurosawa's movies and the Jedi. Like I was saying earlier, it's kind of like just taking a lot of that sense of movement, those kind of character archetypes, warriors, a lot of the costumes are drawn from like the Jidaigeki period pieces that Kurosawa made. Even characters directly, like Yoda, is based around this one samurai named Kanbei from Seven Samurai, who's like the leader.
Mm-hmm.
And he's very like wise and not very overly emotional, very calm, peaceful, and he has this thing that he does throughout the movie, because at the beginning of the movie he shaves his head, and he's constantly like rubbing his head, his bald head, as his hair is growing back, and Yoda literally does that in Revenge of the Sith at one point, and it's like that's so cool that he put that little nod in there, and I think that's something George Lucas does a lot. We were just watching American Graffiti. There's a THX 1138 nod in there. There's a nod to the little ship that Obi-Wan takes in Attack of the Clones, right?
Oh, it wasn't Obi-Wan. It was Anakin when in Attack of the Clones, when they're chasing the bounty hunter that
Yeah,
tried to. Yeah,
I think they both ride in it at one
they
point.
both ride in it,
Yeah,
but it was Anakin who stole it. And he was
yeah,
like, "What
right.
took you so long?" He's like, "I couldn't find
Yeah,
a
he
good
jumps
enough
out the window. That's
speeder."
right.
Yeah, and
Um,
yeah, he reutilizes a lot of the things that he likes in his movies, which is like something a lot of directors do, but it's you could notice it a lot in George Lucas's films. But
well,
yeah, Kurosawa, big, huge influence. In fact, it was John Milius who y'all might know as the writer of, uh, gosh, I'm blanking. Apocalypse Now. He directed Conan the Barbarian, the one with Arnold Schwarzenegger, and he did Red Dawn. Those are like some of the biggest movies he's known for. Also, Dirty Harry did a bit of writing for that. Anyway, he was in school, Southern California, University of Southern California. He showed George Lucas uh, Seven Samurai on the big screen when they were doing kind of like a re-release of it at like an art house theater, and George Lucas was blown away from that movie, and I think he saw it like immediately after seeing it that one time, and I think that's one of the biggest influences on how he wanted to his movies to look and feel.
he even kind of took some beats from Hidden Fortress for A New Hope, the original Star Wars,
Mm-hmm.
as well as characters from that like C-3PO, R2-D2, Princess Leia. Yeah, very much influenced by Kurosawa. So all these things, all the history we've been talking about, Revenge of the Sith, 20 years later, it's kind of the culmination of all these things.
Yeah.
It's the closest thing, I think, to the movies that George Lucas was trying to get to
Mm-hmm.
for his whole career, kind of just constantly chipping away at this vision, this idea in his head. And I think that this is the most uh, pure form of that we have.
Yeah. Knowing George Lucas, he was super into the whole hero's journey archetypes and how you could tell a story and how stories become myths and legends. And I think Revenge of the Sith was kind of like his big legend. Like it's the big story that people knew about but didn't actually witness because of the original Star Wars trilogy. And they know about Darth Vader. They know about Anakin Skywalker. How at first we think he's the one that Darth Vader killed Anakin, but then we find out that Darth Vader is Anakin. And I know back in the day when people were finding out all this information, I'm sure they're just like, man, that's some crazy stuff. I wish we saw how that happened. And I know George Lucas has always put around rumors of, the big fight between Obi-Wan and Anakin on a lava planet. People are like, what? What's happening now? The fact that Yoda used to be a great Jedi master who could use the Force and all and lightsabers and all that, and people are like, there's no way. He's a little puppet. What are you talking about?
Yeah, and he somehow, even if he didn't, I guess, plan on showing all of those things at one point or another, he
Yeah.
does show all of them,
He
and they're awesome.
they're awesome. It's so great. I remember hearing a story about how they were figuring out how to have Yoda fight in Attack of the Clones because we've never seen that happen before. And George Lucas was like, "There's a little thing in the script. I don't know it verbatim what it said, but it was like Yoda and Count Dooku have an unforgettable epic fight." And that's like all it says in the thing. That's not what it said in the thing, but that's what I like. Basically, the
You're
gist of
paraphrasing.
of what it said. And when you read that, you're just like, "What do you mean? How do we make this fight happen? It's
Just
unforgettable."
think about it.
Yeah, and he was like, "Yeah, just think about it." And he was the only sort of reference he was like, "Yeah, I always thought of Yoda as kind of like the Tasmanian devil." And with all the spinning and what, and then the guy who was in charge of doing Yoda for that scene was like, "I don't want to think of the Tasmanian devil. I'm just gonna assume he's gonna be like tornadoing around the entire time." And then it was actually Ahmed Best, who's the actor of Jar Jar, who was really like he was a physical actor. He was like, "Let me see if I could help you with that fight sequence." And so they saw a bunch of uh, like foreign films, like films from China and Japan of people fighting. And there was a wuxia film, which is like this Chinese film type of genre
I
filmmaking.
think it is it not wuxia?
Is it wuxia?
I think
Wuxia?
it's
It's
wuxia.
wuxia. But just think of like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon type of fighting, where they're all just kind of flying and uh, jumping around. And he was like, "Yeah, that's how Yoda's gonna fight. He's gonna fight like that, and that's why he's always hopping around." And for I just know that seeing that in the theaters would have been wild if that was the first time you ever saw Yoda fighting. And he's able to bring these characters that you know and love and give them backstory, and you know what kind of character they are. So when they do the thing that you've kind of been saying that they could do and actually like go forward with it, and people see what they've always wanted to see, it's kind of an amazing experience, I would think.
It's almost like a microcosm of George Lucas's entire career of just, yeah, this can happen, and then everyone's like, how? How would that work? And
Yeah,
then you see it, and you're like, oh,
yeah,
that can happen.
yeah, and it's amazing.
And yeah, so clearly this kind of this film. Sorry, I'm gonna restart that. Clearly, this film means a lot to the two of us, and George Lucas. I mean, just over the course of the last week, just hearing about all this stuff that you basically had already researched just on your own time, but just
Yeah,
like learning about George Lucas because I didn't know nearly as much as you. Um, but I've really come to appreciate this movie even more. I mean, I loved it when we watched it last year. I've loved it my whole life, but it's always great when you love something as a kid and then you're like, oh, it's even better than I thought it was as a
yeah,
kid. And then that's what I think happened with this one,
that
genuinely.
definitely happened with this movie because even I was looking at some of my letterbox reviews back in the day, and shoot, I gave this movie 3.5 stars. I was like, yeah, it's the best sequel movie. Not, I didn't really think too much about it, but then I also saw like as I watched it more and more, I would give it like half a star more, half a star,
But
and
those are the best kind,
yeah,
though. Those are always great when you finally are like, wait, it's the goat.
yeah,
It's
it's
the best.
actually great. Do we
Um,
want to like maybe discuss a little stuff that people might not like about this movie, or some of the criticisms that this movie has
I
gotten?
mean, we talked a little bit about some of the criticisms that it's gotten, such as the dialogue, the acting, everything to do with the prequels, that kind of is carried through those films. Can you think of anything that this movie in particular does that people didn't like?
I think people probably weren't a fan of, like we were talking a little earlier after we watched the film about how Yoda gets defeated by Palpatine and how
This so this was something that I had a problem with,
yeah.
but you kind of changed my mind on it a little bit because yeah, Yoda gets quote unquote defeated by Palpatine because he falls down and then he's just like, well, better luck next time, and he's like, I'm gonna go into exile now. And I always thought that was so lame. I was like, I I figured that they couldn't really kill off any of those characters obviously because they're in the later movies, but
Yeah.
I was like, you couldn't have found a better way to make that fight kind of end in a stalemate. He just
Yeah.
runs away. But you had a good point about it.
Yeah, so I think there's you kind of have to look at all the movies, like all the prequels, like in the same kind of like timeline. Well, obviously in the same timeline, but you gotta kind of look back and see how these characters have been portrayed in the other films. For instance, when Yoda does go against Dooku, and Dooku uses the lightning on Yoda, Yoda was just so easily able to absorb that lightning or like push it back, and it just showcases how Yoda is just he's the best. Like he could take him on like it's nothing, and that wasn't really much of a difficulty for him. But when he's going against Palpatine, you could see that there's definitely a big difference on how he's even able to counteract Palpatine. Whenever he's hit with the Force lightning from Palpatine, he can't easily deflect it. He can't easily absorb it. It's too much power.
It's almost mimicked by the scene of Anakin and Obi-Wan using the Force against each other, and they
Yeah,
both get blown back. It's like the same thing, and I think that's why these two fights happen at the same time. You're getting these two characters that are, for the most part, pretty evenly matched at this point in the story.
I also don't want to like leave this discussion just yet, but I later on I want to talk about how this movie has a lot of duality in it and how there's always two things going on with this movie. There's like a binariness to this movie that we'll see throughout the movie. But before I get there, I just want to continue talking about the Yoda Palpatine thing, and Yoda being the wisest Jedi out there, he knows that he can't defeat Palpatine. He's too powerful. But there's also this idea that there's still the prophecy that the Skywalker would end the Sith.
Well, not necessarily the Skywalker, but a
But
child born of
yeah,
no father.
and
Someone like Anakin.
yeah, and that he would be the one to end it and not Yoda. So there's kind of this idea that Yoda must know that he can't defeat Palpatine because he's not part of that prophecy. He's not. There is no winning this, and he there is a sense of defeat there because if he's the only one that he feels like could beat Palpatine at the time, and he's not the prophetic person to do that, then he's obviously going to lose,
Yeah,
and you kind of have to concede. And I think that's just kind of how you should think about it in terms of him feeling like he's been defeated. Is that he's wise enough to know that it has to happen. There's no winning that fight.
yeah. And there's always going to be balance. So, like, there's always, I think, like a light and a dark, and one will emerge if the other is taken down.
Yeah, and back to the point about how a there's like a duality with the movie and like a binary to it. There's the two fights. There's Anakin versus Obi-Wan, while there's Yoda versus Palpatine. There's Luke and Leia, the two twins. There's
And I do believe that the reason that they're twins, like so surprisingly, right when she's giving birth, is because Anakin turned to the dark side, right? So because Anakin got seduced to the dark side, it throws off the balance, so to speak. There's
yeah,
there's now two Sith,
yeah,
and so there has to be two on the light.
yeah,
So I think the Force literally is like, okay, twins.
yeah,
There's two of them now.
yeah, and that's all throughout the movie. You'll just see like kind of this back and forth kind of thing going on. Um, the dark and the light. It's so very simple. Like when you have to tackle something so big as Star Wars and there's a lot of moving parts, I think the easiest way to go about it is to just kind of simplify everything down to themes and ideas and styles. And I think George Lucas was so into that it probably made making these movies a little bit easier on him, and that's why he says the movies are like poetry, they rhyme. There's a lot of the same stuff in there. There's a lot of the same images and iconography because it's an easier way of filmmaking, but it also has this like chain effect through all the movies where they all have that same um, kind of style or that same like core Star Warsness to it.
Like a tone.
Yeah, and I just think that's really cool. And Revenge of the Sith kind of culminate. What's that word?
Culminates.
Culminate. Okay, so Star Wars, the Revenge of the Sith culminates all those things that George wanted to put into a movie, and all the Star Wars movies into this one movie.
I agree.
Yeah.
I think it. I mean, it is my favorite Star Wars movie that George Lucas directed. So I would agree with you that is his magnum opus. Even though I technically like The Last Jedi, I think a little bit better. But it's honestly, I was considering in the theater if that were actually true. But yeah, so the iconography is just. I mean, it's everywhere now.
It is
It
like
it changed everything.
like Star Wars. I can't just. There's no way of me expressing how much George Lucas really just changed the industry with his movies, and I don't.
I mean,
I,
you don't have to though,
I
because you
know
can just literally look at everything that's being
there's
released.
so much, like there's so many, like we would not have the Marvel universe without Star Wars. Like they wouldn't be able to make those movies without the invention of ILM and all those special effects guys.
We wouldn't be able to make this podcast.
We wouldn't. Yeah, movies would be so very different today if not for George Lucas. And I think that's why I kind of wanted to highlight him a bit more than usual for this particular movie, um, because it's almost mind blowing, like what he did for the industry.
And it honestly further makes it personal for us because, as I said, Kurosawa was my favorite director. Your favorite director is.
My favorite director has always been Steven Spielberg. He's the number one, and he was best friends with George Lucas. They're best friends, but George Lucas had quite the effect on Spielberg in a way that made Spielberg a better filmmaker.
Yeah.
For instance, after Spielberg did 1941, the studios weren't really happy with it because it didn't rake in as much money as Jaws or Close Encounters, and the critics didn't love it as much either. And when Spielberg and Lucas were out on holiday in Hawaii, Spielberg was talking about how his next movie he wanted to be James Bond, and George Lucas was like, "I got you something better," and that was the creation of Indiana Jones. And through Indiana Jones, Spielberg has said that George Lucas was one of the best bosses he's ever had because he was able to learn how to make films more efficiently with less money. Because the one of the big problems with 1941 was that he spent a lot of money to make that movie, for it to not bring back the money that the studios were expecting. But with Indiana Jones, he was able to make pretty much a masterpiece with a much smaller budget and just a really good characters and stories that George was able to come up with. And again, this would change Hollywood with Jurassic Park when Spielberg was doing that movie, and they didn't know how to do the well, they knew how they were going to do the dinosaurs, but they didn't know how effective ILM would be with the visual effects on making the dinosaurs feel more realistic. And again, because of the help of George Lucas, who's actually thanked in the credits of Jurassic Park, because when you know Spielberg was doing Jurassic Park, he was also doing Schindler's List, and so when it came to post production, he wasn't always able to be there. So he gave George Lucas kind of the reins when helping doing the post production on Jurassic Park, and it looks as great as it does now because they were able to do that stuff because of George Lucas. And I just think that's also another great thing within the film community, is that you'll have these good filmmaking friends who can kind of bounce off each other and make each other like better.
Yeah, and that's another reason we do the view finding segment on the podcast too,
Yeah.
because we're trying to look at kind of like the family tree of like
Yeah.
of filmmakers sometimes.
Actually, to bring it back to Revenge of the Sith, you know the scene where Order 66 happens and they kill off all the
Of
Jedi.
course.
Spielberg helped edit that scene because they were trying to figure out a nice kind of efficient way of kind of showcasing all these Jedi getting executed by their stormtroopers, by their clone troopers, and Spielberg I think helped with how they were gonna storyboard it and edit it and how they were gonna pace that scene. So
That's super cool.
yeah,
Well, I think we've spoken a lot of interesting stuff. You especially have
I know.
really given a lot of history
There's
lessons.
so much more I would love to talk about this movie, but my brain's all like there's like too much to talk about
Yeah,
almost.
we're about hitting the time. I think this is a
Yeah.
good time to wrap it up. Well, thank you everyone for listening to this one. This is a really special episode, I think.
Yeah, we did it especially because of the 20th anniversary and because May the 5th.
Yeah, Revenge of the Fifth. So I love this movie,
I love this movie too.
and that's really all I can say
Yeah.
at this point. I
Well,
think we have substantially explained why. So let us know what you think of this movie and the prequels, and hopefully you learned something.
Yeah, tell us what your favorite thing about Star Wars is and how that changed you.
Be sure to follow all of our socials.
Mm-hmm.
The links are all in the description, no matter where you're watching this. And if you're watching on YouTube, listen to the version on Spotify if you want the final cut. If you're listening on Spotify, watch the extended version on YouTube. There's more filler words, but there's also some stuff that we added out, and some visuals that we added in. So check it
Yep.
out. Um, yeah, support the podcast. Follow us. I've been Peyton,
And I've been Adrian.
and may the force be with you.